he peppered that speech with all sorts of references to armed mutiny, treason, deceit, stab in the back, all those things. And yet, something like 10 hours later, this deal was brokered, which, even if it didn't involve dropping all charges against Prigozhin, it left him apparently in the clear to go off into exile. And somehow, that it seems to me there is an enormous mismatch between what Putin was threatening, including punishment for those responsible, and what actually happened.
The mutiny charges against Evgeny Prigozhin have not been dropped. An investigation is still ongoing into the boss of the Wagner mercenary group, as according to Russian media. Let's speak now to Mary Dejevsky, a former Moscow correspondent and a columnist for The Independent, who joins me now. Hi, Mary.
Hello.
Explain what we're hearing about the coup leader's current status.
Well, it was generally understood, I think, that after the agreement brokered by Belarus, that Yevgeny Prigozhin was going to go into exile and that charges against him would be dropped. And those charges were for mutiny. There was a more serious charge that some people thought could have been brought, which would have been high treason, but apparently it had been decided on the slightly less serious one. But now it appears that that charge is still being investigated. And so you ask sort of why. And an answer to that might be that we don't actually know where Yevgeny Prigozhin is. And maybe he needs just an extra incentive to leave the country.
What does this tell us about, and I know you're a former Moscow correspondent, you've covered Russia for a long time. What does this tell us about Putin's strength or lack of it? That, even the future of the guy who launched a coup against him seems a bit up in the air, 48 hours after it happened?
Yes, well, I think there are so many uncertainties about this, including the whereabouts of Putin, because he was said to have left Moscow on Saturday, and the transponder on his plane was apparently switched off before. He is presumed to have landed at a presidential residence near St. Petersburg, but we don't actually know that. So we don't know the whereabouts of Prigozhin either, as I said. So yes, you can see the what appears to be the hesitation and the delay in charges or dropping the charges against Prigozhin as reflecting on the uncertainty at the center of Russian power. But I think there is actually a bigger question posed about Putin's power, which relates to his original statement when he went on when he gave his emergency broadcast on Saturday morning to an appeal to all Russians. He peppered that speech with all sorts of references to armed mutiny, treason, deceit, stab in the back, all those things. And yet, something like 10 hours later, this deal was brokered, which, even if it didn't involve dropping all charges against Prigozhin, it left him apparently in the clear to go off into exile. And somehow, that it seems to me there is an enormous mismatch between what Putin was threatening, including punishment for those responsible, and what actually happened. So the fact that there's some uncertainty about whether Prigozhin is facing charges or not, I think that, in a way, is a slightly paler reflection of the contradiction that we saw on Saturday.
And what can we read into this for the future of Ukraine and the outcome of that war?
Well, the interesting thing in some ways has been that while at the grassroots, there's obviously been jubilation at Russia's difficulties in Ukraine, the administration and President Zelensky himself have been rather more cautious. I mean, President Zelensky spoke about the difficulties facing Russia and difficulties facing Putin. But I think there is a question about how far Ukraine and its forces can actually capitalize on Russia's difficulties. If you were watching a desertion or an unwillingness to fight on the part of Russian troops on the front line, then obviously there would be a huge advantage to Ukraine. But it doesn't appear that we're seeing that at the moment. Doesn't mean that we won't see it, but we don't seem to be seeing that at the moment. On the other hand, we've seen that Ukraine and Zelensky himself have admitted that their much trailed counteroffensive against Russia that seemed to be postponed and then finally started about 2-3 weeks ago, that seemed to be going a lot more slowly with a lot more casualties than Ukraine had certainly hoped. And it doesn't appear, at least so far, that Ukraine militarily is able to capitalize on Russia's difficulties.
Well, we'll see, obviously, how it pans out. Things moving incredibly quickly. Thanks so much, Mary Dejevsky, a former correspondent and columnist, Moscow correspondent and columnist for The Independent.